We are up to step 6 of the Eightfold Path. We're going to call this one Enter Through the Narrow Gate. All right, in the spirit of unity, Jesus and Buddha coming together on this. You're going to see later on precisely where the narrow gate is that Jesus is talking about. But quick review, just to start. Okay, so the first 5, real quick. Right view, let it go. Got it? Right intention, help other people understand to let it go. Do that energetically. Right speech, this isn't your mouth. This is your mouth, okay? Your heart does the speaking, your mouth doesn't. Right action, do 1, 2, and 3. Do 1, 2, and 3. Remember, no precepts, no commandments. Jesus dismissed the 10 commandments by saying you just got to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love another as oneself. That's these 2 right there, okay? And same thing in Buddhism. There's precepts, there's things you can try, but it doesn't mean you have to do it, okay? Right livelihood, do 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can really combine 4 and 5 pretty easily for many different ways, but the idea is to, in the work that you do, whatever that might be, make sure you're doing 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, got it? Pretty simple. You want to live this, these first 5. So in order to do that, it brings us to right effort. And right effort is not going to be what you think it is. In fact, right effort has tripped up many people for a long period of time. Because right effort immediately conjures an idea of something I have to be doing that's sort of outside my comfort zone. Really, it's an ego thing in many ways. Right effort means I have to go to church on Sundays, or I have to read this book, right? Or I have to do some push-ups, whatever, that's effort. Except that's not what the Buddha's talking about, right? The right type of effort, ultimately, it is not an amount of thing, it's really a style. Effort is the way you do these things. And it's mostly, if not entirely, mental and spiritual, okay? That's right effort. I read a bunch of different guys teaching this just to try to pull it all together. And again, a lot of this is the way I perceive it and the way I like to do it and see it therapeutically, okay? But the idea of effort includes exerting some will and having some enthusiasm, but I want you to think about it as your spirit, not the ego. Because what happens when we get all into trying to influence other people, right? You will believe what I believe. Let's go around and tell the world this is how we must believe. Religions have been doing that forever. It's not very effective. What you're exerting in your enthusiasm comes from the spirit. And you have to have some effort there, right? And we're going to talk about why that is. So, I've drawn this. I worked really, really hard on this. You've seen my drawings over the years. At some point, we should put together a video of just my drawings, right? What is that? It's a garden, right? Obviously, I found a pretty pink marker that I used. So I've added pink to the dynamic. And so what do I have here in this garden? I've got flowers, and I've got some grass, and I've got some weeds. Pretty obvious, right? That's what at least try to make it. And this is going to describe a right effort, fairly simply, okay? I call it the garden of wisdom and ignorance. This is the way I describe it. The steps are going to be the Buddhas, okay? Or what we're supposed to do, but I like plugging these words in here and labeling the flowers wisdom and the weeds ignorance. And the effort that we're supposed to be doing is what the effort you'd be doing as a gardener. So if you have a garden, what do you want to do? Ideally, grow the flowers you want and not have any weeds. Simple? Well, that's our mind. And that's the effort that we have to put in. How do I grow flowers? I'm going to have to plant flower seeds, and then I'll have to nurture and cultivate them. That's how you keep flowers going, right? What do I do with the weeds? Got to pull them, and then you got to prevent them. Now you know right effort. But you do that with your mind, okay? Because your mind is like a garden, including your subconscious mind, deep roots, if you will. And guess what we have to do? We have to plant wisdom, and then we have to cultivate wisdom. Then we have to pluck ignorance, and we have to prevent ignorance. That's it. And that's right effort. And that's what we're supposed to do. With one major focus coming up here called the loot. We want to cultivate with the right effort, the right focus, the right view, the right intention, and all of that by practicing these things in our head that work and getting rid of the ones that don't. And that's where we have to put our effort. Again, it's not about action, because if our actions aren't guided by all of this, it's not going to be effective action anyways, and we're not going to spread the spirit. But, and we'll talk about this afterwards with the group, there's hundreds of applications to this, but pretty precisely, when you think in terms of wisdom, just think virtue. And recognize, as I do when I work with addiction and mental health so much, virtue works because it produces good chemistry in the brain. things like patience and hope and gratitude and forgiveness and mercy and all that, produces chemicals like endorphins and serotonin and GABA. All right, it produces this wonderful chemical cocktail, virtue. So if you don't have those virtues, you got to plant some of them. You want to aspire to do something like practice patience. The next time you see a long line of traffic and you just planted that seed, you want to cultivate it. And that's going to be a flower called patience. And that's what we have to tend to, and that's where you put your effort. But if you have another, something else grow up that looks like a weed that grows in the garden, and you could call it impatience, and you have that, well, you want to pluck that thing, and then proactively prepare to prevent that from showing up again. There's many different ways to practice this kind of stuff. In Stoicism, they have a concept called willful annoyance, or something close to that. And it's when you intentionally do something annoying so that you can practice virtues. Like I do with clients. Go, the next time you go to shopping, you know, to Walmart or Giant Eagle or whatever, go pick the longest line, right? Don't always look for the shortest line. Pick the worst parking spot. And then practice the patience and the gratitude, the fact that you had a car to drive there and that there's a shopping mall or a grocery store right there for you to get food. Isn't that nice? When we're walking into stores, are we saying, gee, I'm thankful to live in a country where I could do that? See, now you're cultivating gratitude. These are flowers. You want them to keep growing. And then the weeds, because when you find yourself complaining about things or like, oh, the brand of ketchup I have isn't here. Grousing about that. That's a weed. We want to pluck that thing. And you walk in ahead of time already thinking about right view. It's my attachment to things that causes me my suffering. And if they don't have Heinz ketchup, oh well, okay? And you practice that ahead of time. And now I'm preventing the weed from showing up. And so in every way, wherever you go, you can always be doing this. You can anticipate ahead of time, you know, how you're going to respond. It's one of my favorite concepts is what was Jesus thinking about the week of his crucifixion? Do you think it crossed his mind? I wonder how I'm going to handle that cross thing. You know, I'm sure it popped into his head a few times. I'm like, well, that's not going to feel good and they're going to be mean to me. Am I going to be able to stay focused on mercy? Am I going to be able to stay focused on forgiveness? I'm going to stay focused on what I need to do? Yeah, he was definitely thinking like that. Okay? And which means he was putting in the right effort. How am I going to tend to the garden of my mind? Do it the right way? Guess what happens? You have a pretty garden, don't you? You can look at the garden and go, whoa, I did it. I've learned how to prevent the weeds. I don't have any more. These flowers look beautiful. Well, that's what's supposed to happen up here. And of course, that directly links to here. And that is right effort. Now, a very challenging part of this is how to get the ego out of the way, because the ego wants to control this, okay? The ego thinks, I'll do this, sounds like a great idea. The problem with that, the Buddha describes as like the lute, which is, you know what that is? It's like a little guitar. And if you think of a lute or a guitar, and you tighten the strings too much, what happens? What could happen if you strum them too tight? They could snap, right? So you loosen it a ton. And now they're too loose. What's that guitar going to sound like? Not good either. What do you have to have? The exactly right amount of tightness in those strings, and then it'll play perfect music. This is also known as Goldilocks, their Goldilocks principle, okay? Too hot, too cold, just right. Notice how it's about balance. And here's where you're going to see the narrow gate Jesus is talking about. I'd call it the sweet spot of effort. Okay, what's the sweet spot of effort? Not too much, not too little, just right. And that's the place the ego doesn't live. It doesn't understand that. The ego is trying to control. But in the spot where you're not putting in too much effort or not enough effort, that little narrow gate right there is where you're going to find the spirit. Because it doesn't need to control. What does control like, especially in the enlightenment process? The ego wants to know when it's going to happen. And then the ego wants to take credit for it. I'm enlightened. Look what I did. And in fact, I did it by Thursday. That's when I planned to do it. That's what the ego would say, right? Let me read you some scripture on all that. Ephesians 2:8. This is not of your own doing. This is the line that says, through grace alone are you saved. You can't do anything about it from the ego level. Nothing. Stop trying. You have to put in the exact right of effort. That's after learning all these steps. Well, then it'll work, but it's not going to be you that's doing it. It's the universe doing it to you, right? That's Ephesians 2:8. Matthew 25:13. You do not know the hour in which I'm going to return. That's Jesus talking about the Son of Man returning into us. Again, the second coming is when we all have the Christ within, right? He says, you don't know when it's going to happen. Stop trying to control it. The Spirit just allows it to happen. The ego wants to take credit. And then Proverbs 3:5, lean not on your own understanding. You could throw all this out too, right? It's irrelevant if you don't learn or if you can't feel what that sweet spot is. Well, here's the beautiful part. Mother Nature. The fact is, Mother Nature will tell you how you're doing because you can't fool Mother Nature, right? You're going to be able to tell if those strings are too tight or not tight enough based upon your physiological response and the emotions that come to you. Remember we talked about from Course in Miracles, how right speech, our bodies are communication devices. And we think we're our bodies, but that's like thinking you're your cell phone. And of course, a lot of people do that. But the truth is your body is like energy and it's echoing back to you or telling you like a feedback loop how your strings, are they tight too much? Or are they not tight enough? Are you trying to control this? Or are you just letting it happen? So the sweet spot is telling the ego to shut up, okay? The ego hates this stuff. It's why John ultimately says, I must decrease so he may increase. And I in Greek means ego. And so this whole process, including the fine-tuning aspect of it, plucking these things, which we're largely addicted to, the weeds, we practice them so much, we get good at them. Fear, shame, especially blame in our culture. Remember my favorite Chinese proverb? We're all in the same journey. Those who blame others haven't started. That's a weed. Those who blame themselves are halfway home, still a weed. Those who blame no one have arrived. Flower. Okay? So there you got some Chinese philosophy mixed in with the Buddha and then talking about Jesus too. Bringing it all together, they're all saying the same thing. Let nature do it. Okay? The ego's in the way. The ego's there to remember where your car keys are. Okay? The ego, if you can do that. The ego's there to appreciate this experience and to enjoy these physical relationships we have with each other. That's what the ego's for. Remember your name, right? And, tax time, might want to consider paying your taxes, whatever. That's what the ego's for. The ego is very bad at understanding wisdom. It's so bad that it's like the opposite of it. The thing that's going to understand wisdom in Kabbalah, they call it beyond reason. On the other side, or somehow beyond the ego's intellect, is what's called faith. And on that side, you're going to be able to understand. And that's the sweet spot. That's the only way to do it. Okay? So right effort is balancing the brain ultimately, pulling out the weeds, and nurturing those flowers.